Sippa vorens festa blomma om jag rötig om jag gav dig jag den älskade den kalla röd jag skulle i dig gav jag skulle säga när drivan skall och flicka växte.
Part of Sibelius's song Sippan, the Anemone, the fourth of his 6 flower songs, opus 88. The singer was Alessandro Fisher and his pianist Anna Tilbrook, and that comes from a new Rubicon album out on February the 23rd called A Gardener's World. I'm James Jolly and welcome to this Gramophone podcast. Alessandro's a Borletti-Buitoni Trust Artist and a former member of the BBC New Generation Artist Scheme. And I went to see him in his North London home recently to talk about the new album, which was recorded live at Wigmore Hall in July 2021. Before we talk about A Gardener's World,
yes.
I mean, there'll be people who see your name and think correctly that you've got an Italian mother and a British father.
Correct, she got the first half. Yes, I do. So my mother is Italian from Milan. She was herself a singer and is now a teacher. In fact, she's my teacher. And my father is British, but of Eastern European, Jewish and American sort of descent. So we're a very interesting sort of immigrant family.
But it must be it must be very good for a singer to have Italian as a
it's
sort
a
of
pretty
your second, and not really second language, your first equal language.
That's right. Well, it was, chronologically speaking, it was my first language in the sense that both my parents, in fact, spoke to me only in Italian until I was about sort of 3-ish. So I learned Italian by, obviously socialising in sort of Montessori style things and school. So Italian very much was my first language because I think my mum was determined that not only would she sort of speak to me in Italian, but that it would stick. And I'm convinced that it was that kind of determination at that age that has kept it there. Something that I'm now trying to do with my 1-year-old daughter. But yes, I think it's a profession where Italian is hugely useful. I think in me particularly, it unlocked an interest in languages in general, because by the time even I got to GCSEs, I knew I was practically enumerate and, I was never going to be a scientist or a mathematician, but languages were a huge passion for me. And so my AS levels were all languages, which I was heavily encouraged against, but I would have failed anything else. And then my A levels were 4 languages, read languages at university. I'm sure that in my mind it unlocked something which enabled me to kind of pick things up maybe slightly quicker.
And also musicians, generally speaking, are good at languages because there's a sort of musicality.
There absolutely is. You learn to listen to a language, as you say, like a melody almost, and you pick up the sounds and you can mimic them very well. Of course, you then have to do the research to make sure that you actually know what you're saying. You're not sort of just a parrot on stage, but that ability to listen to the melody of a language is hugely important to a musician, and I think there is something that just sort of facilitates that.
But of course, the great irony of this, having gone through all this, is that there isn't an Italian song on the record.
No, there wasn't, and it was slightly deliberate in the sense that I felt that I wanted to challenge myself and do languages that I am not as familiar with, hence the Swedish and in particular the Catalan. But also, I don't want to offend any huge Italian music fans. We didn't feel that we had managed to unearth something that we felt really gelled with the programme. And it was just as simple as that. I love Italian song. I'm a huge fan of it and perform it at every possible opportunity.
Because it's not actually that well known, isn't it, in the sort of grand scheme of things?
Absolutely. And even more than that, Italian song has sort of got this death knell of it is what students sing in order to learn a little bit of Italian. And so songs like, for example, Tosti and some of the Musica da Camera by Donizetti, they are often sort of viewed as second rate and sort of less worth than lots of other song. But of course the problem with that is that if you compare Donizetti to Schubert, of course you're going to possibly find one lacking. But what people don't realise is that the Donizetti's song and Italian song in general sort of emerged out of opera and fed back into it. It's all about line, melody and emotion, just in a slightly different way to, the more sort of Germanic school. Yes, no Italian song in A Gardener's World. Who knows? In A Gardener's World 2, we may well do. Yes. But yeah, no, it was more a voyage of discovery, I think, for both of us.
So here we are, we're sitting in your music room, overlooking your garden. So the stage of this recording is a great big rosemary bush just by us. So we go back to the pandemic. We go back to 2020 for the sort of roots of this.
That's absolutely, yes. I grew up in northwest London with a tiny, almost entirely patioed garden, and so I didn't have a huge exposure to outside and being outside, and apart from when we went to see people that had much larger gardens, and so I would spend hours outside just enjoying the flowers and the nature and just being outside, which obviously in London is quite a nice thing to do every now and then. And when we moved here and we inherited this absolutely gorgeous garden from the people that owned the house before us, I was determined to keep it A, alive, and B, really encourage new growth and to sort of adapt it slightly and so on. And obviously lockdown, as tragic as the situation that led to it was it enabled me to do more of that. We all had a huge amount of time on our hands to sort of explore other passions and other interests. And for me that was, and my wife, it was basically spending time in the garden, introducing new plants, but also reading up about them, reading up the history, in some instances the sort of the healing properties of them, and of course then that led me down the rabbit hole of how have these flowers inspired poets and composers over the centuries. Because I'm always at pains to point out this isn't a recital about flowers. It is a recital about love, loss, passion,
symbolism,
and the symbolism of flowers, exactly, and how poets and composers have over the century used that imagery to influence their poetry and their music. So then I got in touch with Anna, with whom I'd done a couple of recitals before, and both of us share sort of an interest in this sort of symbolism. And so together we thought we set ourselves a challenge of trying to travel the world as much as we could. I mean, we were slightly limited in our ability to do so, in that my knowledge of music that isn't sort of European was incredibly limited, and so I did try to broaden my horizons, and that took us to South America. It would have actually been quite easy to do an entire program just on the anemone. So many composers love the anemone. It's sort of, early flower of spring, and in particular in the Nordics. So the Sibelius songs that we did, I think 3 or 4 out of the 6 are basically about some variety of anemone.
Does it have tremendous sort of symbolic qualities?
I think especially in those countries, it is the arrival of spring after an incredibly cold, frosty, dark, long winter. That first moment of colour, but I mean, they're not even that necessarily that brightly coloured. It's just, but that just explosion of life. I think that even more than the colour, it's this new life, the rebirth of the earth as it thaws, is hugely important, and that's why it lends itself to the imagery of new love, of innocence lost in the case of one of the songs in the Sibelius. Fresh growth and all those things. And so from one flower, you can get 6, 7, 8 different themes, all of which can be set to poetry, set to music. And so the variety is immense, despite the fact that you're talking about one, incredibly simple flower. And so we said at the time that it was more about which songs we had to leave out rather than which ones we could include, because there was just such a wealth of material. And I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone. I think programs, sort of floral inspired programs, I'm not in any way saying it was a revolutionary idea. It was just new to me, and that's sort of what I wanted to do coming out of the lockdown.
Because one of the extraordinary things about 2020 is that it was wonderful weather.
Yes,
we had an incredible summer that year, and I mean, it was the first time actually I'd spent an unbroken period of time at home. So you actually see the seasons. So you see, flowers come up, flower, die, another lot come up alongside.
Absolutely.
Which was actually unique because, so often it was a question you go home and something had happened or something. But now it was actually, you could see the whole sort of continuum.
And in this profession, of course, we travel a lot. And so for me, I would leave the house seeing that the rose was about to come into bloom, and I'd come back 8 weeks later and it had gone. And so and as you say, it was this really unique opportunity to witness every single minute detail. And it was also really interesting to see which ones didn't work as successfully. And, I have no idea why they didn't, but that it sort of, again, it makes you think about what is it, sort of almost the randomness of how sometimes things are successful and sometimes they're not, and flowers that the previous year had definitely worked, this year suddenly didn't work. And again, that is another thing that leads you to think about life, that, you know, you have something that you do all the time and that works incredibly well, and then just suddenly you have this one incredibly bad experience and it ruins it for you. Or, you know, and life is inextricably linked with the cycle of the seasons, and as a result the flowers, and I just was really inspired by that. We had a lot of fun pinging ideas back and forth. Because it was only an hour programme, we were sort of limited, in inverted commas, exactly how many things we could choose. And we also didn't want it to be too token. We wanted to make sure that we gave every language, every nation, every poet an opportunity to really speak. So we sort of didn't want to have just one song in German and then one song in Spanish, you know, because we could have done 30 different languages if we'd wanted to. But I think we wanted to delve a little bit deeper than that.
I mean, if you look down the list of composers, I mean, you know, there's an awful lot of very familiar ones. But I mean, you know, the one I probably don't think I'd ever heard of is the Catalan one.
Yes.
Edward Toldrà.
Toldrà, yes. Well, he was introduced to me by a very good friend of mine, a Catalan soprano who I was at Guildhall with. Because I had mentioned to her the ideas of this program, which is, you have to include Toldrà because he's sort of a bit of a cult composer, you know, among art song enthusiasts in Catalunya. And so I listened to his music, and it's beautiful. It is incredibly romantic and expressive, but there were also moments in it which are quite sort of sparse, where that sort of Latin, you know, for want of a better word, passion sort of almost gives way to a much... I think of one of his songs in particular, the A l'ombra del Lledoner, in the shade of the almond tree. I see it as a huge landscape where everything you need is in front of you, but you just every now and then need a little bit of help to be drawn into a certain image, the image of the young girl weeping on one side, and then he pans back out again, and you see this beautiful scenery, and then over on the other side there's her knight in shining armour riding in, and it's almost like a life story, but it's not sort of this is showing up my own ignorance before I looked into this music. It's not sort of all castanets and fire. There is this sort of almost cold approach to life and love, and how love is sort of this, can be this very cold, distant thing.
Si passava un cavalier col cavalcante la brida. L'arbre lido, l'arbre pos, l'orage maniac.
Any stereotypes that you might have had about a nation's music or a nation's poetry are immediately blown away the second you really delve into what does each season, what does each change of the weather, change of scenery mean to a local resident. And I think that was all, you know, part of the joy of it, was being able to explore different nations from our own homes, because obviously we weren't allowed to leave them, with the joy that is the internet, where we could sort of do plenty of research.
Did you actually try and do any kind of like remote rehearsal, you know, pianist in one place and you...
Thankfully, by the time we got to rehearsals, we were able to meet. So that was yes. But I mean, I did a couple of e-auditions over the course of lockdown, which was really bizarre, because inevitably there's always a bit of lag, there's always a bit of something. So it was really, really odd. But no, thankfully Anna and I were able to meet. But we could travel the world. We would have our rehearsals, and then after it we could travel the world and look at all the different flowers, all the different images, the history of the poets that we you know, whose songs we were singing. And yeah, it was a really exciting time, even though we couldn't physically go and visit these places. The biggest challenge for me is that when I sing, you mentioned obviously there are no Italian songs in this program. I was very fortunate to go to Italy a lot as a child. I probably spent, you know, about a third to half of my year in Italy as a young child. And so I have really clear images in my mind of when I'm singing a particular song. It's easy for me to travel there in my mind's eye. But what I think makes a song really great, just in general, is when a composer brings you to that place, even if you've never been there in your life. So for me, the biggest example of this was the Guastavino, the Argentinian songs. I've never been to Argentina. I would love to go to Argentina. But singing in particular the cortadera, which is this, it's not even that beautiful a plant. I mean, it's sort of like a pampas grass that sort of sways in the wind. And yet it's his memories and the poet's memories, and then combined and set to music. It just immediately transports you there. That is a work of genius.
And was that a language that was tough to get your tongue round?
So I've sung in Spanish before, but not in South American Spanish, and specifically Argentinian Spanish. I have to say that as an Italian, it's probably easier for me to sing South American Spanish than sort of mainland Spanish, because obviously there are all sorts of differences and all sorts of, I would say, I think mainland Spanish would say that there are all sorts of rules that have been relaxed when in South America, and actually as an Italian I found that quite helpful. Weirdly, Catalan was by far the hardest. It is miles away from just, you can't just sort of say, oh, it's sort of a bit like Italian and Portuguese, or it's a bit like this, that and the other. It is so unique and so different from anything else I'd say. It was even harder than Swedish, for example, and that was the biggest challenge for me. But again, I was lucky to have this friend who was willing to sort of do coachings and work together on it. So that was really helpful.
Of course, this sets you up very nicely for the future. For if you find yourself in one of these countries, you need an encore to kind of slay them.
Exactly.
Although probably singing a Catalan song, you'll have to be terribly careful where you actually sing it.
Well, yes, and this is the other thing, is that by travelling the world like this, you sort of want to. It was something again that we weren't able to do physically for about a year and a half. And so it was a form of escapism. And so you've got the kind of micro escapism of going into your garden, and then the much greater escapism of being able to travel the world through its music. Yeah, I think politics and music and I sort of feel that they should ideally never mix. And so, yes, you do sometimes have to be careful about where you perform certain songs and sort of which ones and so on. But I just wanted to sort of transcend all of that and just and present as global as possible a slice of life.
And you end with that lovely little quartet of English songs in English.
Yes. I mean, I love singing in English, of course. It's not something that I actually did a lot of until, I mean, I always say a couple of years ago, but of course we've had this sort of 3-year almost sort of hiatus in between. But English song came to me quite late in life. Also late in life. I mean, I'm 35, but sort of later in my professional life. It's just something so immediately recognisable about English song that it's just so special and so unique. It really is. I think the Muriel Herbert songs were new to me. It was Anna that introduced me to Muriel Herbert. I find that, and I'm sure people will disagree with me, but I feel that English song has this link to Italian song in that raw emotional state. There is something so beautifully human about the approach to melody in English song, which I feel resonates very closely to me in terms of the Italian side of me as well. And so the flow of Violets, for example, by Muriel Herbert, it's just sort of this perfect song from beginning to end. You feel as though when it starts, you're just stepping onto this beautifully gentle travelator. You travel through this song, talking about these beautiful little delicate flowers, and the fleeting nature of life. And then you sort of just step off at the end as if you almost don't notice it's happened. And I love that about songs.
It's a gorgeous song.
It's just love that. So we had a lot of fun exploring English song.
Violets, shy violets, how many hearts with you compare, who hide themselves in thickest green and dance unseen, ravish the enraptured with sweetness.
I think the bizarrest song in the entire programme has to be Elgar's, the Language of Flowers. We sort of started with the Language of Flowers in Die Blumensprache by Schubert, and then we sort of ended with another Language of Flowers by Elgar, which was composed for his sister's 12th or 14th birthday, something like that. It was a little bit of a dare or a bet that they were going to try to find him some really weird thing to set to music. And it was his name escapes me at the moment, but he was an American sort of geologist who had written this thing about the language of flowers across the world, what they all mean. And it is a bizarre song. It doesn't sound like any Elgar that he composed after it. It's almost more, would, dare I say, G and S. But it's just this beautiful song talking, it sort of put into exact words the imagery that we had tried to recreate over the course of the programme. And I just thought this is a perfect little song for it. So we did enjoy that. You have to have a little wry smile on your face, because it is not Elgar's best piece of music. There's no doubt about that. It's just, it seemed to fit particularly well and sort of sum things up. Yeah, English song, it had to feature for me because it's just become such an integral part of my life now. And after all, this was an English garden that had inspired the whole thing. So, I couldn't not include it. And we have violets in the garden, we have daffodils in the garden. I sort of wanted to really embrace that. But it was a lot of fun. And then we finished with Love's Garden of Roses by Hayden Wood, which is just a beautiful song. I love Hayden Wood. Again, a little bit like some of the Tosti songs, I feel that his music sometimes is slightly looked down on as not proper art song.
Well, I think anyone who dabbles in kind of lighter music is somehow tainted.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a shame because...
Well, I mean, generally, if you think of a lot of these lighter composers, they were such craftsmen. I mean, someone like Eric Coates,
yes,
absolutely perfect little miniatures.
Absolutely they are. And just because, we touched on this earlier with the Italian music, just because maybe you don't feel as intellectually challenged by the melody of a piece, because, it does pretty much what you expect it's going to do, and yet... even though you know where this melody is going and you know the image that he's sort of painting is nothing brand new, it's nothing unique, and yet it still touches you very deeply emotionally. And I think for me, that's what music has always been first and foremost. It's always been about the heart first and the head second.
There's enormous sort of comfort in familiarity, isn't there?
There really is.
Even if if you've not heard the melody before, but you know where it's going, you just kind of feel very at home with it.
Absolutely. It feels like a great big hug. And I think in particular, again, considering the circumstances that this recital came out of, I felt that's what we all needed. Something where it just felt, as you say, even if you've not heard it before, you feel as though you have, because you basically know where it's going. And it just felt like a great big emotional hug. And I wanted to give people that at the end of the concert. Yeah, so I've since performed more of his songs, and let's say there's certain generations who maybe sort of connect to it even more than others, but everyone from 1 to 100 feels deeply emotionally touched by his music, and I think that means it's just as valid to be performed as any other. And ultimately, the encore, the Misalliance, was pure indulgence on my part. I think I remember saying in the hall at the time that I'd be lying if I said that the programme hadn't partly come about so that I could include Misalliance. I grew up on Flanders and Swan. Flanders and Swan, Tom Lehrer, Victor Borge, had all his records. I think they're still up there somewhere. And
they were all absolute geniuses. Every time I stumble across, say, a Victor Borge or a Flanders and Swan, you just think, this is just so clever.
It is absolute genius. And Misalliance in itself is the perfect sort of 3-minute song. But Flanders and Swan in general, just, again, incredibly emotional. But also they are quite cerebral in the sense that the way that they play with the English language and subvert expectations at times is really very clever.
Flanders and Swan and Victor Borge and others, it's sort of music of a particular time because they assume a certain knowledge of music and the musical world, which actually probably wouldn't work at all today.
Yes, you're right. I think they require a certain knowledge of or understanding of music and that. But the fact that they have that emotional sort of core means that even now, you can really enjoy them. And it is a shame that they wouldn't be able to, that they probably wouldn't have the same success today. But I think that's all the more reason to sort of keep them alive and keep performing these songs. When I was at the Guildhall, I used to perform quite a lot at lots of the livery companies through around London. And usually what the livery companies would write to Guildhall asking for is some opera at the end of the evening. People just wanted to hear, Brindisi or sort of something like that. And I had to say, personally, from personal experience, having been fortunate enough to attend a couple of these bosh, often the last thing I want to hear at the end of quite a long evening is someone shouting Brindisi down my ear. And so I would often offer, I'd say, look, you can have some opera-y things if you like, but also I sing quite a lot of Flanders and Swan songs, and always they went for the Flanders and Swan, because it does evoke obviously memories of a different time, but the themes are just as relevant now as they were then. Ultimately the story of misalliance of two lovers who were forbidden to be together it's a tale as old as time, but just set in a very comical, entertaining way. And just the fact that it's comedy doesn't detract from the message, and if anything, it makes it that much stronger. And I've always felt that I'm a huge fan of comedy, and again, I sort of pretty much inherited my father's sense of humour. So I grew up Marx Brothers, Goon Show, all those sorts of things, and so comedy has been an incredibly important current through my life. And I find pretty much everything funny, and try to make everything as light-hearted as possible as I can. But I feel that often comedy, a bit, we've discussed it multiple times, the Italian music, some, the Haydn wood, people sort of think of it as putting down something or as trivializing. And I don't think it does at all. I think by enabling us to smile about something, to laugh about something, you're still thinking about it. You still go away. You don't go away thinking, oh, that's not important because I laughed about it. You go away thinking, okay, I laughed about it, but what was the message? And I think that's hugely important. And that's why I would try to include some Flanders and Swan or Tom Lehrer in pretty much every recital I do, because I feel that it brings the audience in closer by making them laugh.
The fragrant honeysuckle spirals clockwise to the sun, and many other creepers do the same. But some climb anti-clockwise, the bindweed does for one, or convolvulus to give her proper name. Rooted on either side a door, one of each species grew, and raced towards the window ledge above.
Part of Misalliance by Flanders and Swan, the encore from our guest Alessandro Fisher's new album, A Gardener's World. And that's out from Rubicon on February the 23rd. Gramophone podcasts are free, but if you enjoy them, then a really great way to support our work is to take out a subscription to Gramophone magazine. Over 13 issues a year, we bring you hundreds of reviews by our expert critics, as well as in-depth articles about the latest classical music releases and the most exciting musicians of the day. And if you head over to gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and enter the code podcast20 in the checkout, you can even get a 20% discount off any subscription package. We really value your support. And consider leaving a review or rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And do look out for another Gramophone podcast very soon.